Start recording. Okay, awesome. So for this episode, I was thinking we should discuss the subject of fear. I think it's something that every human can relate to,
Yeah,
and it's a very powerful emotion. I think it's one of the most powerful emotions. I think the question that I would like to start with, or the concept that I would like to start with, is this concept of the only thing that we have to fear is fear itself. And I'd like to share two quotes with you, which I think prime this question quite nicely. The first one is, I'm an old man have, and have known a great many troubles, but most of them never happened. That's Mark Twain. And then the second one is, a coward dies 1,000 deaths, but a brave man dies only once. That's William Shakespeare. What do you think about the concept of fear and how the only thing that we have to fear is fear itself?
yeah. So for me, I'm not gonna say I have no fear. I've just learned to have fear on my side as an ally, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like those quotes both elaborate, fear is an illusion,
Mm,
I believe. And I believe that concept that you just spoke about um, clarifies that, right? Because your fears aren't always a true reflection of what the reality of that happening will actually be like or feel like, you know? So I think if you can look at fear as something that you should really unpack properly, you're then able to work alongside it better.
mm,
And I think a lot of people in life don't unpack fear when they feel
mm,
it,
mm,
and I think it's the consequence of not unpacking it that paralyzes you, that
mm,
gives you anxiety, that makes you have self-doubt, and that ultimately doesn't allow for you to charge into that fear and get onto the other side of the comfort zone.
mm.
So yeah, in a nutshell, that's just my perspective of the concept. I mean, what's your take on it?
I really, really liked when you said the word unpack the fear there. I really enjoyed that because for me, that is so key. I think so often what lies on the other side of fear is growth. And there are so many things that in my life where when I was younger, I was afraid of it, but after facing my fear, I became completely comfortable with it, you know? And I do believe that's the nature of things. Um, I think you must put fear in its proper place, meaning you should have respect for it, but you shouldn't allow it to rule over you, right? And fear is a great indicator of a truth that you need to acknowledge. So it's always speaking to you in some way or another. And you also say anxiety there, which I like because I think anxiety is such a bad connotation today in this world where we talk about mental health a lot. And everyone's always saying, I'm so anxious, I'm so anxious. And it's like, yeah, no, 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 you're not anxious, you're afraid. And you're not
Yeah,
dealing with your fear. So why are you afraid? Instead of
yeah,
taking, again, it's like not to go too much into the whole pharmacological epidemic that we're dealing with today, but often we want to numb ourselves so that we don't feel the fear instead of acknowledging that we're afraid and asking why. You know, just giving yourself permission to be afraid. You'd be like, okay, I'm
yeah,
afraid. Like, once you acknowledge your fear, you can face it.
yeah,
But if you
yeah.
pretend it's not there, you're lying to yourself, you know?
And I like how you mentioned that acknowledge, right? Because there are consequences, like I said earlier on, to not unpacking your fear,
Mm,
you know, and one of those consequences are, when you use the word anxiety again, nervousness, doubt, um, the inability to stay calm,
mm,
and all of that comes from perceiving a potentially false pretense through the lens of fear,
mm,
you know. So unpacking it allows you to ask yourself questions like, is what I'm feeling really real? Is there actually a reason to be
Yeah.
scared or nervous? What's the worst thing that could happen?
Yes.
You know? And I think once you start having those conversations with yourself, you then are able to not eliminate it, but acknowledge it,
Mm,
and then tame it. And when you tame it, the consequential effects that I mentioned before don't possess you as much. And I mean, on the contrary, fear also can be something that protects you. So,
absolutely.
not to go into the pharmacological side of it or biological side of it, but like fear is also your body's natural response to warn you that, something bad could happen, right? But
Yep.
it is your responsibility to analyze that response, right? We have the power of consciousness, you know? I'll use like, there's this is it a pug? These dogs that are very fearful.
Yeah. Maybe Chihuahuas or
Chihuahuas, exactly.
yeah.
They I'm just gonna use them as a concept, right? Like dogs don't have consciousness like we do, right? They cannot analyze and really look at. And like based on my experience, those dogs are always afraid.
Mm,
Any sound, they jump and run. They bark, they quickly react. But us as human beings have the ability to pause, analyze, wait, and then make judgment of whether, you know, yes, fear is protecting me here, or um, this is just false pretense, and I need to make sure I navigate it properly. So, yeah,
absolutely.
I think that's definitely one of the secrets to not say overcoming it. There's many ways, but you also need to understand that your body is just naturally responding based on the fact that it senses something it's not familiar with.
I think that's a great way of looking at it because the meaning that you give it often dictates how your relationship of fear works, right? So if you're saying to
Yeah.
yourself, I'm anxious, I'm afraid, this is terrible, this is bad, it starts like a cycle, and then you're so sucked into this loop of anxiety and fear that you're not
Mhm.
acting, you know?
100%,
Anxiety
100%.
always stems from inaction when you're not
Yeah.
acting. It's like it's worse to stand on the side of the pool for 10 minutes than to just jump in and do it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
the cool thing is, I found in my life, when you face a fear, it unleashes this amount of positive momentum where you start to just face all of these different things. And you're like, shit, if I can do this, I can do that, I can do that, I can do that. So, I mean, that actually segues into the using fear as an ally thing, which I'd love for you to talk about, and we can jump onto that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, based on what we've discussed now, I think we, you know, have unpacked the fact that like fear is something for you to assess, right? And I think in the accuracy of you assessing fear, you're then able to use it to your advantage,
Mm.
you know? And like for me in my life, and I've seen it many times over in the books that I've read, I've come to learn that fear is also something you can use as motivation,
Mm.
you know? Obviously within moderation and within balance, but like, something that drove me for a long time, especially when I was studying, was the fear of failure.
Absolutely.
You
Absolutely.
know, um, the fear of being scared to fail my modules really drove me to make sure that I put in that extra effort, right? But when I transitioned into real life, I realized that the fear of failure is no longer applicable, right? Because the school of life requires you to fail to become wiser. And
Sure.
now I use it, you know, in a different way.
Yes.
But yeah, that those are the two concepts of like using fear as an ally. Right now, fear as an ally for me is cool. Let's go right into it, and whatever life throws my way, I think I'm gonna handle it. As opposed to
Mm.
when I was in school, fear was like, dude, I'm so scared to fail. So the byproduct of that was the energy to go study.
Absolutely.
And as a result, I passed. What are your thoughts on it?
I couldn't agree with you more. It's funny, the more I get to know you, the more I'm like, This guy is exactly like me. When I was at university, my parents said to me, if you fail one module, we're gonna pull you out of Stellenbosch and we're gonna put you in bits. And
Yeah,
that was enough of a
yeah,
thing to me that I said, no, no chance. No offense to anybody that went to bits, but I was like, no
yeah,
ways. So
yeah,
yeah, I think what's also important is understanding that you need to look at it from a risk perspective and how you can mitigate that risk. So, like one of the best exercises I ever did was from Tim Ferriss's book, The 4 Hour Work Week, where he does this thing called the fear setting exercise, where you define your fear very specifically. You write it out and then you assess what is it about this fear that scares you? What are the consequences of the event
yeah,
happening?
yeah,
Okay. Then you say to yourself, okay, how can I mitigate these consequences in advance? And then how can I rectify the consequences if they do happen? So if something bad happens, how can I come back to a place of stability, right? And then the other thing, which is a great concept to look at, is, well, what if it goes right? So like often fears, what if it goes wrong? Then
mm,
and that fear paralyzes you. But asking yourself the question, well, what if it goes right? What's the upside? Is also a very important thing. And then looking at the consequences versus the upside, and then asking yourself, if I'm honest, what do I think the probability of the upside versus the downside is? So, like, let's say for young men, a common fear is approaching a pretty girl and asking her out on a date because rejection
mm,
hurts. And that's the downside, right? You go up to her, you ask her, she says, no, you freak, fucking leave me alone.
yeah,
Again,
yeah,
that's the
yeah,
downside. But the
yeah,
upside is she says yes. And now
yeah,
you get to go out on a date with the chick that you like. You know,
100%,
and you must be honest
100%.
with yourself. What's the probability that she's going to say yes versus no? Like, if she's been looking at you 10 times in the last 10 minutes, then maybe she's going to say yes. But if she's got a flippin' boyfriend, yeah, she's probably going
Yeah,
to say no.
100%,
So
100%.
that's a powerful tool for me, I think, in assessing risk. And like you say, as you progress in life, you realize failure is inevitable because it's part of the journey.
Mm,
Um, the key thing is learning from it. So treating it as a lesson instead
yeah,
of just getting into a loop of repeating the mistakes of the past, because that's a big problem.
100%.
That's real failure. Making a mistake is not failure, but repeating the mistakes of the past is failure, right?
Yeah, 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 yeah. And I also think like, over and above failure, I think, like you said, making the mistakes of the past is failure, but also failing to really deeply assess the lessons in the failure also is a failure, right? And I think that is what breeds the fear of future failure.
Mm,
When you fail to really understand, why things keep on happening,
yeah.
you tend to get more and more afraid of them, and like, I'll speak on the journey of entrepreneurship. Like I'm not an entrepreneur myself, but I have done, a few
Entrepreneurial.
projects, and like one of the things that consistently happen are continuous failures, and you find like in the journey to entrepreneurship and to this goal that you see for yourself, if you don't understand that fear is part of the journey, the more you fail, the more anxious you get and the more negative you get about it, right?
Mm,
Um, and say many of the times the concept is not wrong, the business idea is not wrong.
mm,
It's just that the method in which you are assessing your failures isn't allowing you to improve your tactical steps going forward. It's almost like the concept of failing fast,
yeah.
you know? Um, but failing fast without learning from your lessons breeds fear, you know? So I'll go back to what you initially said, which was quite nice. Like, you know, fear is the meaning that you give it,
Mm,
you know? And I think if you give it a proper meaning that is real and in alignment with reality, you're then able to use it as an ally, to advance yourself going forward.
Absolutely.
Um, so yeah, that's just my 2 cents on that topic. But yeah, never easy to master, you
Yeah.
know. But I do think it is something that everyone should always be conscious of. And like the minute you're scared of something, like I said, you need to understand that it's your body's natural response to protect you.
Yeah.
And in that moment, you need to decide here, do I accept the protection, or is this protection false?
Yes.
And is real glory and real protection actually on the other side of this fear,
Well
you
said.
know? Um, so yeah, that's just my 2 cents on that. But I don't know if you have anything to add on there.
There's two things I would add. So the one is you are either building your courage or you are building your fear. There's no in between, right? The more you face your fear, the more you build your courage. The more you let your
Yeah,
fear rule you, the more your fear becomes powerful and you become more fearful.
yeah,
Unfortunately, there's no choice. You know what I mean? Like you cannot be in between courageous and fearful. You are either being
for sure.
courageous or being fearful, which is
100%.
quite it's quite harsh, you know.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
unfortunately, that is how it works. And I
yeah,
would say courage. One of my favorite quotes is not courage is not the absence of fear. It's taking action in the face of fear.
yeah.
Which always helped me a lot because I was very fearful. A lot of things. I think I've said before on the podcast when I wanted to go to this kickboxing gym in Stellenbosch, and I sat in the parking lot for like a week before going into the
Yeah,
gym because I was so
yeah,
scared. I was like, oh my God,
yeah,
I'm
for sure,
my
for
ass beat.
sure.
And then I went, and it was the most alive I've ever felt. It was awesome. And
And
it,
like and,
yeah, yeah,
and like I mentioned there, right? Sometimes the protection is going into that fear,
yes, yeah,
not running away from it, right? And like you
yeah,
said, that you felt the most alive, which is a very beautiful way of saying it.
yeah. And I think the second thing I wanted to say is, I think one of the secrets to overcoming fear is focusing on why you want to do the thing that you're afraid of. When you focus more on the why than on the fear, you can overcome the fear, like having a good purpose for it. Um, you know, I think there's this connotation about courageous people that they don't feel fear, but it's just they've accepted the fear and they're focusing on something else. So, like daredevil athletes and guys that do things that we all think are foolish, they have that similar thing of that's when they feel most alive, right?
Mm,
It's like
mm,
I've been skydiving, I've done these things, and it
yeah,
sounds crazy, but like there's this experience of life when you're doing stuff like that that you just don't get in everyday life. So
yeah,
I can completely
yeah,
understand why Oaks do it, even though the risk is so high. You know, they're chasing that high, for lack of a better
for
word.
sure, for sure,
So
for sure, for sure,
obviously
for
we
sure.
can take that and apply it to more meaningful things like serving our purpose and being courageous in daily life. Like one of my favorite
Yeah,
quotes, and I'm going to paraphrase this because I didn't write it down, but it's from one of the great Stoic philosophers, Seneca, where he said, one of the most courageous things you can do is just facing your day sometimes, your everyday life, like just being
yeah,
courageous in your interactions with
yeah,
your world around you. And to a lot of people, that might not seem courageous, but it depends on what you're feeling. It's like we say, courage is not the absence of fear. It's taking action in
yeah,
the face of it. You might be
yeah,
fearful about a meeting that you have. Just putting your hand up and being courageous in that is something, you know.
for sure, for sure. Wow, dude. But yeah, I mean, I guess that's a very nice place to wrap it up. But in a nutshell, fear needs to be unpacked, and fear needs to be analyzed in such a way whereby you determine whether you're really being protected or you're stuffing yourself from experiencing growth and feeling alive. I don't know if you have any other way to paraphrase this episode, but I like how you just broke it down there.
Perfect way to end it. Yeah, like I say, guys, uh, courage is not the absence of fear. It's taking action in the face of fear. I think that's a great place to end it.
Well said. Thank you, my brother.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.